Well, welcome to week 2 of our Natural Mental Health Resilience Retreats. Tonight we're going to be talking about nature's rhythms and the most important rhythm, which is sleep. My name is Henry Emmons, and I'm a co-founder of Natural Mental Health and also an integrative psychiatrist.
I'm Dr. Tim Colbert. I'm an integrative developmental and behavioral pediatrician, and I'll be talking a little bit about tips for parents on how to support their kids during these challenging times.
And hey folks, I'm Amy. I'm here to support you through your program. Yes, so enjoy tonight's talk.
Well, I'm going to start by reading just a couple of short stanzas from a poem by Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke. I actually read a little snippet of a poem of his last week. I want you to know that Rilke is not the only poet I like or that I read, but he's pretty good. And so I'm going to start with him again. Rilke says, "Young ones, don't waste your courage, racing so fast, flying so high. See how all things are at rest. Darkness and morning light, blossom and book. See how all things are at rest." Last week, I mentioned to you just my sense of kind of a strange feeling of happiness at the start of this coronavirus stay-at-home time. And I've been reflecting a little bit about that. And I think it has something to do with the great sense of spaciousness that it seems to offer. And it reminded me of another time I'd had that. It's about the only time I can remember where it felt so distinct. And this was almost 20 years ago in early 2001, just a little before 9/11, when my father died. He was elderly, he was not well, but his death was still unexpected. And it was my very first really big loss. So I was shaken. And I know many of you, probably all of you, have had similar experiences, and you know exactly what I mean. But I was really surprised, and I remember very distinctly how different a feeling I had in the week after his death. So I was kind of in my early part of my career, had young kids at home. It was a really exceptionally busy time of life. And really, when I look back on it, my life had always been busy. And so to be freed up from that, and I didn't have to do anything, didn't go into work, didn't have to return any phone calls. Everything was taken care of by someone else. I don't even think I did a whole lot of childcare with my kids at the time. So everything, I was just freed up, and I had this incredible sense of spaciousness where I didn't have anything I needed to do or any place I needed to go. So it was a luxurious, rich time of being able to just be deeply with my sense of grief and loss in a way that didn't feel heavy. It felt just rich and almost expansive. So I know that feeling I was describing a week or two ago, it may not last, it probably won't last. It's something that some of you have probably shared and others not. But one of the things that it points out to me is that we human beings, being part of nature, we crave cycles, we crave periods of rest following periods of activity. And really all of nature does this. After stress, there's recovery. After a lot of busy activity, there's rest. After day, there's night. It's just the way of things in the world. Everything in nature goes in these cycles. Nothing besides human beings from time to time, nothing else is on 24/7. And of course, we can't be on 24/7 either, not really, not without costing us. So we're wanting to focus tonight on what we consider the most important of nature's rhythms, and really probably the one non-negotiable linchpin for mental health, and that is sleep. So I have not fully appreciated sleep and all that it offers until pretty recently, when I was researching my last book, which was about kind of taking care of your brain as you age, something I'm increasingly interested in. And I realized in doing that research that if you want to keep your brain working well, way into your later years, you really need to take your sleep more seriously and attend to it. And yet, 85% of adults in the United States report insomnia in any given year. 85%, it's a huge percentage. And so I offer this question, and I wonder if you've thought about this yourself. It's a question that scientists have asked for years. I've always found it intriguing myself, and that is, why would we human beings, really, why would all creatures have evolved to need to be completely unconscious for about a third of their lives? What is so important about sleep that we would be left so vulnerable to predators or enemies or what have you by being fully unconscious for so many hours a day? And so I want to go through some of the things that sleep does, which points out its incredibly important nature, and how I think of sleep as being something of a miracle when it comes to what it does for mood and for mental health. So sleep does lift your mood. And I think you know this from your own experience. If you have had even one night of really good sleep after maybe a period of higher stress and not sleeping well, even one night, you will notice how much better you feel the next day, just almost immediately. It's better effect than what people would get from an antidepressant. And the research on this is actually quite striking, that people with clinical depression who are able to restore their sleep have an 87% chance of restoring their mood back to their baseline. 87% chance of recovering from depression. There is nothing else that comes close to that. So restoring sleep is at the top of my list. Now, sleep also stabilizes the mood. So people who have bipolar illness or just mood instability or a lot of, sort of intense emotional reactivity, again, sleep is often disrupted in this. In fact, I've come to see sleep and problems with sleep as perhaps the most important, most common trigger for a bipolar episode if somebody has that condition. So keeping your sleep stable does an incredible amount toward keeping your mood stable. Sleep also improves memory, and if you're interested in learning new things, if you're a student, for example, or you're preparing to do a major talk or something, if you want to retain the information that you've been learning, the best thing you can do is to get a good night's sleep beforehand, because it helps to put what you've learned into memory and kind of cement your learning. Now, one of the reasons we're talking about sleep now is because it has such a lot to do with the function of our immune system. And it actually works both ways, meaning that if you're sleeping well, your immune system is more responsive in a good way to fight off invaders like viruses. But also, this is really important, I think, that when we sleep well, your inflammatory system works better, much better, so that you don't overreact to something like a virus. And it's really thought to be that it's the overreaction to the body's, especially in the lungs, the way it over-responds to the virus that causes so much of the potential damage. So you don't want to have a lot of inflammation in your body. And there was a really remarkable, huge study done a few years ago with a beautiful name. It was called the Heart and Soul Study, where they looked at hundreds of thousands of people and looked at a lot of different variables, but they were looking at what effect they had on inflammation markers and chronic illness. And so they measured things like the CRP and the interleukin-6, which are markers of systemic inflammation. And they found that people who slept less than 6 hours a night had a 2.5 times greater elevation of these biological markers for inflammation. So if you want to keep your immune system working and also try to improve any sort of chronic illness, you want to work on your sleep. So why does sleep work? I'm going to go through just a couple of the major reasons why we think sleep has all these kind of miraculous effects on our health. And I think one of the most important, which is also one of the most, probably the least recognized, is how important sleep is with the timing of all of our physical processes. This is called chronobiology, or the study of sleep and life forms. And what it is telling us really is that every cell in your body, every part of your body is managed by a timekeeper, a 24-hour circadian rhythm. And every cell has its own little timekeeping system in it. But the body is governed by a major timekeeper called the pineal gland, right back the forehead here. And the pineal gland, you might know, is where melatonin is produced and released. So melatonin, the sleep hormone. But it's not only melatonin, it's really all of your body's hormones, including the stress hormones, that are impacted by this 24-hour rhythm. So when you're stressed, for example, your secretion of cortisol changes over the course of the day in ways that can really disrupt your level of fear and level of stress and anxiety, but also your sleep. Really importantly, it can disrupt your sleep. So we want to really remember the importance of time and timing, and also that this timekeeper, the pineal gland, is really dictated by sunrise and sunset. So it's our exposure to light. The second really important thing that sleep does is it helps the brain to clear itself out from toxins. So in the course of a busy day, when you're really active, you're thinking a lot, you're going to your job, you're studying, whatever, your brain is metabolizing a lot, and it is producing a number of metabolic byproducts and toxins. And you have to be able to clear those out. Now, the rest of your body does that with something called the lymphatic system, the lymph system, which most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. It's a series of channels that runs parallel to your arteries and veins. But there's not enough room in your head to have this series of channels because we've got this thick skull that keeps the space limited. And so what scientists discovered only recently, just a few years ago, is that there is a similar system in the brain, but it is only open at night. So at night, when your brain is not as active, especially in deep sleep, those brain cells that are so active during the day, they shrink. They literally get smaller, which opens up space for these lymphatic channels to become open and clear out the waste from the day. Incredibly important if you want to keep your brain working well with age, which I think we all do. Third thing that sleep does is it repairs the body. And this is especially important when we're sleeping really deeply. So, you go through sleep cycles, you're not always in deep sleep. Sometimes your sleep is just kind of light, and other times it's full of dreaming, the REM sleep. But it's the really deep sleep where the brain waves slow down really slowly that your body's able to repair itself. So for example, if you've had some kind of a sports injury, tendonitis or something, which we get every day, we're always, the theory is that our bodies are actually getting injured all the time, but we usually repair it really quickly. When you have something that doesn't heal, it doesn't get better, it's because that repair system's not working well. And I think a really good place to look initially for that is whether you're getting enough deep sleep. Final thing I'll mention is that when we are in the dreaming sleep, so the REM sleep, which we usually cycle through a few times over the course of the night, it's an odd combination of when your brain is really actively working. And sometimes it's working out a problem or a conflict or something that's been really bugging us. But it is doing so at a time when you're under really low stress. So the brain's stress hormone called norepinephrine goes way, way down when you're in dreaming sleep, which essentially gives you a really safe, kind of comfortable place to work out some of the stuff you need to work out. It's like getting free therapy every night. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about how to improve your sleep. And this is actually a big topic. We have a lot more information that you can access on our website. So please, if sleep is a problem for you, put it at the very top of your list. Gather more information, use the resources that we and others have for you, and don't give up until your sleep gets better. I'm going to tell you a couple of things that I think are just super helpful. And then I want to talk about something you can do if you're up in the middle of the night, as so many of us are. So the first thing, and I think one of the most important, remembering about the chronobiology, about the circadian rhythm, is to keep your sleep pattern at a really, really regular 24-hour cycle. So essentially that means getting up at virtually the same time every day, including weekends. I try to tell this to my college student patients who I think roll their eyes when they hear it, but some of them take it seriously, take it to heart, especially somebody who has a more serious mental health problem. They'll learn pretty quickly that this is really, really helpful. Keeping your sleep regular by getting up at virtually the same time every day. And then the second thing, which is related to that, is to use light and light exposure really wisely. So by that I mean letting yourself mimic nature, even if the sunrise is not happening at the right time for you. So for example, living in Minnesota where I do, in the middle of winter, sunrise is simply too late for most of us to have natural light be giving us this signal. So if you can't do it with natural light, do it with some kind of very bright artificial light, like a light therapy device, or just even a really bright light bulb. But do something that gives you that intense signal of bright light first thing in the morning, because in truth, you're beginning your good pattern of sleep the following night when you first wake up in the morning. You start right away in the morning, creating a good night's sleep the next night. Now, the other side of the light issue is about an hour, or even better, about 2 hours before bed, you should just turn the lights way, way down in your house. Think about camping. If any of you have been campers when you were young or recently, and when you don't use a lot of artificial light. So maybe you clean up after supper, after sunset, you might have a fire, you sit by the fire, talk for a little while, but within about an hour or two after sunset, you're feeling so sleepy that you can hardly keep yourself awake. And that is really what our nature is meant to be, is to let our bodies naturally want to go to sleep within about 90 to 120 minutes after sunset. So again, in the middle of summer in the northern parts of the country, that's not going to work so well because sunset is so late. But you can still, use your light and light exposure wisely. Get the blue spectrum out of your light devices. Turn off your cell phone, your iPad, maybe even the television, although that's not as bad because it's further away. But certainly stop working on your laptop or pad at least an hour, and preferably 2 hours before bed. I'm going to shift gear, and before I turn it back over to Tim, I just want to give you a little method of dealing with this common experience and sort of distressing experience of being awake in the middle of the night and starting to ruminate. Last week, I shared my story of waking up coughing in the middle of the night, and my mind started taking off with that, and coming up with all sorts of dire possibilities. But it doesn't have to be something as serious as getting sick with coronavirus. It could be anything that you start thinking about where your mind kicks into gear in the middle of the night, and it's going to take you from just a momentary waking to being wide awake, to being stuck in this ruminating cycle. And we've all been there. Some of us go there a little more often than others. I think I'm actually built a little that way, where if I'm overly stressed, or really I don't even have to be stressed. I can just wake up and start thinking, and then I take off. But I do think we've all been there. And if you have, you also probably know from experience that the biggest enemy to getting yourself back to sleep is when you start to fear that you're not going to be able to get back to sleep. That very thought that, oh man, I'm going to be awake the rest of the night, I'm not going to be any good tomorrow, I've got a big day at work, I've got a big presentation or something else going on, and now I'm not going to be able to get back to sleep. And you know exactly how that goes. So I'm going to share a couple of things I've learned, and I want to offer you a little acronym I made up that makes it really easy to remember. The acronym is NAP, N-A-P. Take a nap or use a nap in the middle of the night when you want to just simply get back to sleep. So this is what I do. Try it. I think you'll find it helpful. The N stands for notice. So the first thing you want to do is you want to notice that you're stuck in thinking. Now, this is actually a lot harder than it sounds, because we're so identified with our mind and our thoughts that we forget that we're thinking. We actually start to believe that whatever is going on in our mind is actually true. I have learned, and I think you'll agree with this if you look at it very closely, that anything I'm thinking about at 3 or 4 in the morning is probably meaningless and worthless. It's not worth paying any attention to. But it's hard sometimes to be able to step back, recognize that you're thinking, you've just gotten caught up in that thinking pattern. And in that very act of recognizing that, of noticing it, separate you a little bit from your thoughts and take some of the agitated energy out of it. Again, it's a little harder to do than it sounds. Practice it. Try and do it with a meditation practice during the day, where you start to identify with your capacity to see yourself thinking, to observe yourself. But in the middle of the night, it's super helpful. I just recognize, okay, I'm just thinking. I'm not going to pay any attention to it because I know it's just rubbish. And if I don't give it any energy, it's just going to wear itself out eventually. Step number 2 is to accept. So first you notice, and then you accept. This is also hard to do because you don't want to be doing this in the middle of the night. But if you can accept it, if you can just allow yourself to be doing what you're doing, saying to yourself, at this moment, what I'm doing is simply laying here in bed, thinking and observing myself thinking, and just allow it to be. And again, you can't force your mind to stop, but if you can accept it and allow it to run its course, before long, it will do that, and it will just gradually dissipate. Step 3, which I think is my favorite, is presence, the practice of presence. I take this very literally. So when I'm laying there in the middle of the night, I've gotten a little bit worked up or agitated. I notice that I'm doing it. I accept that this is what's happening right now. And part of my acceptance, by the way, is to know that I am going to be okay the next day. I'm going to get as much sleep as I need. I will eventually fall back to sleep. And if I don't, I don't, and I can still get through my day. I've done it 100 times before. But what I do then is I bring sort of a conscious, loving presence to myself. You might think about what a loving parent would do to an upset child in the middle of the night. You just give that kind of presence and comfort to yourself. And I take it literally enough that I just lay on my back. I place my hands right over my chest, or I might place one hand on my chest and another one on my belly. And I just feel the warmth that I'm conveying to myself from my hands. I know that I'm comforting myself, and I just let myself enjoy it, actually. Enjoy being present in the middle of the night. And it also takes some of my attention away from the thinking. So I can't think as much because I am focused on the feel and the warmth of my hands on my chest. So eventually you're going to get back to sleep. And again, remember, if you don't, it's going to be okay. And sleep, because it is so important for everything else, how your mind and your body and even your heart works. If you're not sleeping well, at least 7 or 8 hours a night, most nights, find some ways to work on it. Go to our resources in the website, learn more about it, keep working on it until you get it right. I'm going to turn it over to Tim to talk a little bit about how to do some of this with kids.
Well, I really enjoyed that, Henry. Thank you so much. You know, one of the issues is that, and I'm sure you're all somewhat aware of this, that those of you that have kids, is that even at baseline, in the best of times, about 50% of kids in the United States have some kind of sleep disturbance during their childhood years. And so you can imagine that when we add the heightened stress and the disruption in the routines of this pandemic, that if anything, of course, we're going to see more transient or short-term sleep troubles in kids, and this becomes an issue. We know that because of sheltering in place, for example, most of us are already perhaps a little bit more irritated with each other and a little bit difficult and maybe more easily frustrated with one another. Well, you add in sleep deprivation, especially with the kids, and we see a lot more in the way of irritability, tearfulness, and kids that are more prone to temper tantrums. So it's just, you know, part of the deal. Additionally, when we look at this lack of restorative sleep in kids, as Henry mentioned, it really is the case that it slows down your immune system response. And so it can make you basically, you know, less resistant to your average viral infection. And then finally, as kids are beginning to work on school now, they're going back to school with online schooling, we notice that sleep deprivation also can cause distractibility, difficulty with memory, and it has a negative impact on response time. And so for a lot of reasons, we have to support our kids in getting good sleep. And I look at sleep as a chance to really develop a whole family approach, if you will, to this idea of a sleep routine, a sleep ritual. And it can be really a valuable and a precious and a special time for people. And so I think instead of that idea that many kids, you know, dread their bed, what we want to do is look forward to bedtime and have everybody saying, hey, I want to go to bed. This is a really positive thing for both the kids and the parents. And so how much sleep do kids need? Well, this is important to understand, because if you think about the wake up time for the average child and what time you have to get them up to get them to school or get them going, you then have to, you know, kind of reverse engineer the hours backward and then determine their sleep onset time. And so for young kids, the preschool kids ages 3 to 6 years, we're looking at 11 to 12 hours a day, or a night, I should say. Elementary school kids 10 to 11 hours a night. And then finally, teenagers don't realize this, but they need up to 9 hours a night to feel really good. And so that's important to help the kids and the teens to understand that. For optimal performance, they really got to get that full uninterrupted sleep. Now, some of the top strategies just in general, I'd say, to support sleeping kids are the following. Number one, get those kids moving all day long. So the recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics is at least 60 minutes a day for physical activity for all kids ages 3 up to 18 years old. Kids younger than that need more like 180 minutes a day to really feel good and to kind of discharge all that nervous energy. Secondly, we want to help kids to manage stress during the day. So as it turns out, if you have a lot of unaddressed stress all day long and anxiety and worries, that very much impacts both your sleep onset and your sleep maintenance because your nervous system is just too aroused to get good sleep. Finally, I want to make this comment, and you guys are aware of this one as well, but please remove all electronics from the child's room within 60 minutes of desired sleep onset. Unplug that stuff, cell phones, televisions, computers, and literally remove it from the room if you can. I think that's the best bet in terms of avoiding different difficulties later on. If you have some questions about these ideas and you want more information, a couple of good resources for you just to think about. Number one, there's a great website called sleepforkids.org, and that's an offshoot of the National Sleep Foundation. Really good information, and you'll see that at our website, Natural Mental Health. Also, take a look at this book for parents, really well written from a sleep specialist named Dr. Judy Owens, but it's called Take Charge of Your Child's Sleep. So that if you really want to get some more detailed, if you will, sleep recommendations, take a look at some of those items as well. Now, why emphasize routines and rituals for sleep? Well, I think the best thing about predictable sleep rituals and routines is that they really cue the brain in to get ready for sleep every night. And I think for kids, it involves this sense of security, predictability, and really increased happiness and less stress, because we do know that structure and consistency reduce anxiety in kids. So I think this idea of every night doing the same things at the same time really makes a lot of sense. I think also for parents, routines give them a good sense of control as a parent. I think it's a good sense also of calmness and feeling successful as a parent when you see how smoothly things can eventually go. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to, as a family, really look at sleep routines as non-negotiable and as some very set and scheduled part of each day. I think it provides a very pleasant way to end the day with a great amount of love and connection. So I want to leave you with a great sleep approach that was developed by this child psychologist, Dr. Don Huebner. It's found in a book called What's to Do When You Dread Your Bed. Great book for kids on good ideas about how to help themselves to rethink their associations with sleep every night. And this mnemonic device or acronym or set of strategies is called Shift, Snug, and Snooze. So let me just describe this to you. And I think it's a great approach for kids with any kinds of issues at bedtime. The first step is called Shift. And with this step, what you want to start doing is within, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes, begin to go through a set of routines or rituals before your child gets into bed that they can replicate every night. This would be things like, number one, slowing down the mind and the body by, let's say, laying out your clothes for the next day, maybe cuddling with your pets and saying goodnight to them, maybe engaging in late conversation with your parents. This is also a good time to do things like brushing your teeth or taking a bath. And so I think that's a great first part of a sleep routine that ends with the child then getting into bed. So that's the shift part of the equation. The second part is snug. Snug means literally snuggling up with your parent, hopefully, if you would like to do that, but intentional calming activities then in the bed together with your child as a time to really get good quality time. As you, I'm sure, all know, many times kids at the end of the day, as their mind and their body are winding down and quieting down, become very chatty. And so I think this is a great time to engage them a little bit in conversation about how's their day been and what's meaningful to them, what are some of the things they were maybe grateful for during the day. And also it's a great time to practice some self-soothing skills together, things like diaphragmatic breathing or meditation, or maybe some favorite place mental imagery. So that's a great time to do that together, because I think kids really appreciate a time to do these quiet and kind of connected and intimate activities with their parents each night before bedtime. Other things, reading, listening to a quiet song perhaps, or music, journaling, maybe sketching. All these things are really great things to do in this phase we call snug. And I think it's important to understand that we sometimes have to repeat these activities for several weeks in a row to get them really to take hold. And then finally, in just the last couple of minutes, when you are ready to leave the room, then what you want to do is tuck your child in for the last time, turn the lights out, maybe kiss them goodnight or give them a goodnight hug, and then say a phrase like, I love you, or maybe, I hope you have sweet dreams. And then that's it. You really want to leave the room. So I think that approach, shift, snug, and snooze, is a great one to think about. And ultimately, we know that many kids will struggle with some sleep difficulties, either falling asleep or staying asleep. And also remember that some of your best tools are going to be, number one, using positive reinforcement. So you can reward kids for doing a good job with sleep, and maybe reward them the next day and talk about what that would look like. And then secondly, sometimes you also have to use consistent active ignoring. So if kids are getting a little out of hand, they're coming out of the room several times, remember as parents too, we might have to use some of those strategies. But here's the good news. 90% of kids do respond to behavioral management strategies that have sleep difficulties. So if you're willing and able, just hang in there for a while and it will get better. So those are some quick tips for you in terms of working with kids and supporting their sleep. Now, I think we have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So why don't we dive right into that, you guys?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I can't help but wonder, Tim, if you're one of those kids that gets more chatty as it gets close to bedtime.
Yes, my brain is pretty much going all day long.
So here's a really good question that someone asked. Amy sent it to me. Here's a question. It seems hard to actually get out of bed these days. Sleep seems safer than the outside world. How can we move from sleep to awake with less anxiety? I think that's a really great question. And it's true, isn't it? I myself have noticed I'm having a harder time getting out of bed. It's not really because I'm so anxious. I just think I'm just sleeping more. I'm probably sleeping an hour more per day because I don't have to commute into work and all the rest. But I do recognize that, for many of us, the bed just feels safe and sleep feels safe, and it's a nice chance to forget all the stuff that's going on. So here's a couple of suggestions. One is, I think that you could, when you first wake up in the morning, you could practice that very same technique that I referred to doing in the middle of the night, the nap technique. Obviously, you're not using it to fall back to sleep. You're just using it to calm yourself before you go out into the day. So first you notice that you're feeling fearful, that you don't want to face the day. So you try to accept that. That's simply my experience right now. And then you provide some presence to yourself, some comfort, some care, some, remembering that you've done it so many times before, you can do it again today. You're going to be okay. I would also say, I want to reinforce this, that I really feel that we need to practice some mental distancing for ourselves. In other words, we need to be careful what we're taking in through our minds, what kind of information, what sort of scary statistics and stories. And I'm not suggesting that we put our head in the sands and ignore this whole thing, but you don't need to start your day with it. You don't need to end your night with it and, be reading or taking that stuff in right before you go to bed. Maybe you just need to do it in a really small chunk of the day, some time in the day when you're not so caught up in it and you feel a little like you can handle it a little bit better. So I would say, really be careful how much of that you let in. And if you need to, just give yourself a break from it for a while. A
question for the kids out there is, what minerals or vitamins or supplements might be safe to use with children and teens that are having trouble with either sleep onset or sleep maintenance. Probably one of our favorite things you've heard maybe us talk about before is magnesium, this mineral. And magnesium is wonderful to help people to both fall asleep and stay asleep. The typical dose range in terms of the more common forms of magnesium called magnesium citrate or magnesium glycinate or malate is about 200 to 500 milligrams prior to bedtime, depending on your age and your body weight. There's also a newer form of magnesium called magnesium threonate that's wonderful as well and gets into the brain a little bit more effectively. That dose range is typically about 600 to 1,000 milligrams prior to bedtime as well. It is safe to use melatonin for kids, especially kids with neurodevelopmental issues such as ADHD or autism. Typical dose range of regular melatonin is about 1 to 5 milligrams taken, 30 to 40 minutes prior to bedtime. There's also a controlled release form of melatonin that can help you to maintain sleep through the night. That typical dose range is about 3 to 5 milligrams. And then even for, older kids and teens, we've seen some success with CBD oil, 10 to 15 milligrams taken about an hour before bedtime as well.
I'll add just one other supplement to that list. And by the way, the things Tim mentioned work equally well for adults and very, very similar doses. The one thing I'll add, because so many people are feeling such a higher level of stress these days, is something called stress support, which is mostly herbs, one amino acid called phosphatidylserine, but the combination of those things is really helpful at kind of turning down the impact of the adrenal glands and the stress hormones. Another question that is a little bit different twist on the first question I responded to, and that is too much sleep a problem right now? All I want to do is sleep. Someone asked this the other night too, and yes, in fact, you can sleep too much. Even though I've been preaching the virtues of sleep, there is a right amount, there's a window. And if, like for example, people who are struggling with depression or prone to it, if they sleep too much, invariably they'll feel more sluggish, more tired, less motivated, and very often even more depressed. Think about what happens in the winter months, in the heart of the winter, when you feel so tired and sluggish and you want to sleep probably 10, 12 hours a day. If you let yourself do that, you'll feel worse. So you have to really make an effort, especially right now when you probably do have more time on your hands. Try to keep your sleep between 7 and 9 hours. For most of us, the sleep sweet spot is 7 to 8, but there are some people who need a little more. But I don't think very many people need more than 9. So keeping it in that time, remembering to get up at the same time every day, use a bright light device if you can, and if you need to first thing in the morning.
Another question about, devices in your room. And I think it is a good idea in general, if you can, if it's safe for you to do this, and if you don't have a need to, listen for a pager or an emergency phone call or something, I think it is a good idea to remove all electronic devices, period, from your bedroom if possible. And there's a really great new report on this at this website if you want to take a look at it, commonsense.org, commonsense.org. It's called The New Normal, and it's a beautifully done study, national study, on how, especially in particular, cell phones are disrupting the sleep of our parents and our teenagers across the United States. It's just profound. It's amazing. And I think will really wake you up, so to speak, in some ways. The other concern I have, in terms of screens at bedtime or in the room, is this concept of electromagnetic fields, and those might be disruptive for sleep as well. There's kind of some new research coming out on that. It's something to be aware of. And then finally, if you are going to use a device at night, for example, for a meditation app or for some other calming purpose, a couple things. Number one, I think there are some really good apps out there. For example, there's apps that play music that helps to train your brain into delta waves, which are the sleep waves. And so that kind of music on an app can be very helpful. This is called audio entrainment or also isochronic tones music. So think about that. If you're going to use an app at bedtime, make sure to use the night shift feature on your cell phone so you have a orange filter over the screen so you filter out the blue light that we know suppresses melatonin release.
Well, I think we are at our time. So we want to thank you for joining us. Don't forget that there's something going on virtually every day of the week. So please go to the weekly page, join us during the week for meditations, yoga, music meditation, Tai Chi. There's a lot of good stuff going on. Please come join us next Wednesday at 7 when we will be glitch-free technology-wise, and we'll talk about rhythms and how to eat for both your stress support and also your immune system support.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's be healthy.